This is Jarrod, the Managing Director and one of the analysts here at the Real Story Group, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest installment in Real Story Group's webinar series. This topic for this afternoon's discussion will be the best practices for selecting the right digital agency or integration partner. This is certainly a topic that we have been discussing quite a bit over the last 15 years, but certainly more recently in the last year or two, it's become a more and more of a pressing issue for many organizations out there, and I think that's quite evident by the number of you on the webinar today. It's great to see so many Real Story Group subscribers, a lot of familiar names out there, but it's also great to see a lot of new names out there as well. So thank you all for joining me today. So our agenda today is really quite simple. We'll start off like we start every presentation and webinar and give you some perspective and disclaimers. Then we'll dig into the best practices, and finally we'll finish up with some Q&A. We have about a half hour today, so we'll be moving pretty quickly, but we'll try to save as much time as possible at the end to answer some questions. Let's jump right in. So for those of you who are new to Real Story Group, we are fundamentally an analyst firm that evaluates technology and the vendors that produce these technologies. We produce research that is available for purchase or in subscription form, where we get the updates to our vendor evaluations on an ongoing basis, as well as some advisory times from our analysts who do these evaluations. And so fundamentally, research and analysis is at our core of everything that we do as a company. The other half of the business, and much of what I'll be talking about today, is really comes from the consulting that we do with a variety of organizations from every industry, with companies and nonprofits all around the world. We do really only 3 types of consulting engagements. We do some high-level technology strategy, where organizations are looking for a roadmap on what they should concentrate on from a technology perspective. We do ongoing technology audits with organizations to look at incumbent technologies, whether they're homegrown or purchased, and we give some feedback as to whether or not the incumbents are still stacking up with what's going on in the marketplace. And then finally, we do product and vendor selection type projects, where we help align the technology options that are out there in the marketplace with your particular needs, and really work with you on a process to winnow down your options and test your options and make sure that you're ultimately making the right technology decision for your organization. And that's a lot about what I'll be talking about today, with a little bit of a slant, because we'll be talking about agencies and integrators, integrator partners in particular. But what I think you'll see is the process that we use for selecting technology is very similar to the process that we're recommending for you to look at when you look at bringing in a partner. Again, our basis of what we do is based in research, and we are constantly looking at 8 different technology marketplaces. Those of you who have been following us for quite some time, you know our roots are in web content and experience management technology. When we were founded over 14 years ago, looking at just web content management technologies. But over the last 15 years, we've certainly expanded into a number of other digital workplace and digital marketing technologies. The common thread here is that they're all content-based technologies, and I'm not going to be speaking about any one of these marketplaces specifically today, but again, what I will be focusing today is a little bit of a different slant. When we're talking about agencies and integration partners, I think when you're looking for partners in any of these marketplaces, what I'm about to share with you is applicable to any of these spaces. And finally, our common or constant disclaimer: when we evaluate technology vendors, it's important to note that we do not work for any technology vendors. We do not consult technology vendors. We don't speak at technology vendors' events. We don't write white papers for them. We don't take meals from them. This is kind of embedded in our ethos, and it's really something we're quite proud of and passionate about. And that enables us to give you, buyers of technology, the real story when it comes to making the tough decisions that you have to make. Okay, so when I talked about our consulting services, I talked about we help a number of clients every year pick the right digital workplace and digital marketing technology. And over the last 15 years or so, we've tried to codify that methodology into a series of phases and steps that we call RSVP, which stands for the Real Story Vendor Procurement Process. What this really is a set of 6 phases, and if you break it down, 20 steps on how to go about a selection the right way. And I'm not going to go through all 20 steps today. That's a different webinar and a different engagement, and I'm certainly happy to do that with any of the subscribers that are on the call. If you'd like to schedule more time to go through this in detail, we're always happy to do that. But looking at this, I want you to take away a few important points. The first is that this process is designed to be both agile and empirical. Agile in the sense that, yes, there are 20 fixed steps here, but they don't have to be fixed in the order that you do them or the amount of time that you devote to each of these steps. It's meant to be an agile process in that you, as an organization going through a selection process, you can pick and choose which steps you're going to use for your organization, and also pick and choose the amount of time that you're going to devote to them, the amount of importance you want to devote to each of these steps. Now, the most successful selection processes we've ever seen are the organizations that go through the most of these steps and really do devote a number of hours and time to doing them right. So I'm not encouraging you to skip them, but I am suggesting that this process is malleable in a sense that you can customize it to your own particular needs. And secondarily, we mentioned that this process is empirical or testable, and we certainly are stressing that word test throughout this kind of process. If you look at the second phase here, we have noted a step here called develop testable scenarios, and this is the idea of writing really descriptive without being overly prescriptive use cases that you're able to test a vendor, a technology vendor, or a technology partner as to their capabilities of achieving that for you. And you'll see as I go through this, that idea of developing these testable use cases that are really unique to your needs, and using those scenarios to test at every single phase of this process. It is really, really important, and that's what really will ensure your success at coming up with the right partner. So we'll talk about that more in a few moments. The other word, in addition to test, that we use all the time is fit. And when it comes to selecting technology or a partner, we're always talking about finding the right fit. So I've already started talking about finding the right fit from a scenario perspective, but it is always important to think about a technology's fit within your organization. It's also important to think about any solution's fit from a value perspective. It's never a good thing to pick something that you can't afford, or if you have or leave money on the table when you go with something too cheap when there's something better out there that is a good fit. I'm not going to be talking about those 3 things as much today as I am the third piece of the puzzle here, and that's partner fit. And really, the reality of today's situation is that any of the technologies that we are covering in the 8 marketplaces that we're watching quite closely on a day-to-day basis, they're becoming more and more complex, and they require more and more expertise to implement correctly. And I can't stress this enough. Any of these vendors that we look at, and you can see a whole list of the vendors, the close to 200 vendors that we're evaluating on our website or via our semi-famous vendor map that you can download off our website. This is not plug-and-play technology. None of those vendors out there are plug-and-play technology. You really need to place a premium on some outside services, from consultancies to integrators and other partners, and services from the vendors themselves to really to do an implementation correctly and really get the most out of what you're buying. If there's some silver lining in this caveat here, is that what we're seeing kind of across the board is that digital teams are getting more and more budgets applied to doing these projects right. This wasn't always the case in the past, and it's certainly not the case in every organization, but if there's a common theme that we're seeing is that there's more emphasis and reality being placed on what it actually takes to get these projects done correctly, and that's good news for you. So when we talk about implementation skills, it's often very easy to fall into the trap to just think of the technical skills, and I've highlighted here some of those technical type skills in the blue boxes here. You know, it's easy to think about just the configuration necessary to get the software up and running. It's easy to think about just the front end development you need to get the screens painted correctly. It's easy to think about the back end development you need to do some integration with across the different systems. Now, that's all really, really important, but what we often see is people neglecting some of the softer skills, I'll call them, those boxes in green here that are equally, if not in some cases more important to consider. Things like user experience type skills, things like project management skills to make sure that this is implemented on time and on budget. Things like migration support is almost never considered until it's too late, and almost certainly always given short shrift and can bring about quite a bit of surprises. Proper graphic design, proper information architecture, business process analysis, and then quality assurance. All these things are really important softer skills that you need to make sure that you have in any implementation project, whether you provide it yourself or you need to go out and get it from someone else. And that's what we'll talk about next. So I think it's helpful to kind of think about this in three different categories. So the first of which is you, and you really need to be honest with yourself as to what it is that your team can bring to the table. And I can't stress that you really need to be honest with yourself. Be honest on what is your technical team's capabilities. You know, are they savvy in the Java platform that you're about to bring on? Do they have enough Java experience? Have they gone through implementations like this and successfully rolled out implementations in the past? And likewise, from your business users, do you have enough skills to make sure that your day-to-day needs are being met from a usability and user experience perspective? Likewise, do your main stakeholders in your organizations have enough skill to negotiate the contracts to put you in the best positions to be successful in the long term? These are all things that you need to start to consider at the outset, and just be honest with yourself about what you're about to take inside your organization and where you might need to supplement those skills with some outside help. With any technology project, you're going to be sold some professional services from the vendor themselves, from the technology vendor themselves, and this is good and bad. Vendors are really good at getting their technology implemented in general, right? Because they know their technology better than anyone else, and that's really important to any technology implementation project. Now, where they're not so good is providing a lot of those softer skills I talked about. You might have some people filling those roles, but in many cases, it's just about their knowledge is fairly limited in sort of the best practices with regards to their own system, and you might get more value with getting some of those softer skills from organizations that have a more broader set of consulting experience. So where it does make sense to just do an implementation with just professional services is you might have a very specialized system implementation that you have going on and with very little customization needed. And in that case, by all means, use the professional services and use the professional services alone. You know, there's no sense bringing in another firm in that case. Just get it done and get it launched. But in many cases, that's not the case. You know, in most cases, I'll say that it's more than just a strict basic implementation that's needed. And in many cases, you do need to go outside to supplement your team's skills. And so when we talk about third parties, we're actually talking about quite a few different options that you have at your disposal. The one obvious one is a pure integration firm, someone to come in and help get the system up and running. Beyond that, there's a number of digital agencies out there that specialize in doing a little bit of everything. You know, they bring to the table some of the technical skills that you might need, but also they bring many of the design skills and a lot of those softer skills. And then beyond that, there's a number of specialists who really specialize in many of the points that we discussed, that we're about to discuss, and are really good at helping you get over the hump with regards to one specific area. So I wanted to just show you this example. This is purely a web content management based look at the marketplace of options that you have at your disposal, and we could have done this for any of the marketplaces that we cover, and it would look fairly similar. In any of the marketplaces, you're going to have, you know, at your left the tier 1 integrators, we'll call them, and you know, as an analyst firm, this is what we do. We like to draw boxes around things and try to make sense of things, and that's what we're trying to do here. But if you think about the big names out there, the Accentures, the Deloittes, the Tatas, the Wipros of the world, who really have integration skills on a number of different technologies and can bring a lot to the table there. Moving down the spectrum, you know, we have what we'll call a tier 2 integrator, and these are firms that are largely technical in nature, but and probably have some very specific concentrations onto the types of technologies that they have experience in, and for many organizations who don't want to go with the size of a tier 1 integrator, they might be able to find a better fit at a tier 2 level. And then if we think about adding in more of those softer skills in addition to some of the integration skills, you know, you get into the conversations around the global agencies that are out there, and these firms are really offering a myriad of services, but in some cases you got to be careful. You want to make sure that they have the right level of experiences when it comes to the technology itself, and I guess the risk here is to get blown away by some of the softer services, some of the flashy design services, and you really want to make sure that they have the chops to really help you in the pure integration. In the web content management world, again, like all the other spaces, you're always going to find some specialists who just concentrate on a particular technology. So we've highlighted some web content management specialists. And on the right side of this screen, we have what we call the vendor professional services organizations, and almost every vendor has some professional services arm. You want to be careful there because some professional services organizations from vendors are much more baked out than others. You know, some of it it's a very important piece of their business, and others it's not so important. So choose wisely there. And then it's definitely worth saying that there's a number of independent people out there who again are really specialized in what they do. You know, there we have migration consultants, taxonomy consultants, governance consultants, search consultants, all of which who are really good at what you do. And if that's what you need, sometimes that might be the best fit. It's just to plug that hole with an independent consultant. And again, these are just representative lists. By no means are they exhaustive. There's hundreds more that we could add to this list, and we're just not ready to go there just yet. So maybe the most controversial topic we'll discuss today is which comes first. Do you choose a services partner, or do you choose the technology itself first? And it's interesting when we think about this, when it comes to the services, you're actually probably going to spend a lot more money when it comes to services than you are on the technology itself. Sometimes many multiples of what you actually spend on the technology itself. But when it comes to technology, it's in most cases, and we're generalizing here a bit, you'll probably have a longer relationship with the technology partner than the services partner. So it's a very interesting question. Which comes first? Well, let's tackle each of them. Should you pick a services partner first? You could. You could pick a partner and have them bring in the tool that they think is the best. Now, this is an approach that many firms out there actually recommend. We do not. We only recommend this if you're looking to implement several major package solutions at the same time, and you need someone to look over all of them and help you coordinate it and put all the pieces together. That's really the only time we'd recommend you picking the services firm first. We think for organizations that are looking to do to implement a single type of technology, we think that this is very risky to choose the services partner first, because what we found is that the technology itself is fundamentally suited for a particular scenario, and when you bring in a service partner first, you may the software that they know may not be truly a good fit for you, and you'll ultimately spend your entire implementation trying to shoehorn it to get it to do what you ultimately want it to do, and in many cases getting it to do what it's not particularly good at. And so that's where we see a lot of projects go wrong, and so that's why we almost never suggest picking a services partner first. So let's dig in a little bit deeper here around the systems integrator and vendor relationship, and kind of give you a little bit more sense on why we almost never recommend picking the services partner first. So I think it's no surprise to anyone on this call that systems integrators have tight relationships with specific vendors. Now, this is a good thing in many cases, because they're the ones who are getting the information about new versions, new features and functionality, new product updates, best practices. They're getting that information first, and that's great. However, they also have very tight relationships with just a very specific number of vendors. So they might only know a handful of products when you should be looking at a multitude of products. Likewise, these systems integrators train their developers on very specific tools and build teams focused on implementing it. Again, that's very good in the sense that you get a level of depth of knowledge of these products from the developers on these systems integrator teams. However, you can really only know several, I'd say a handful of products at the most at the level of depth you need to do implementation. You know, before becoming an analyst, I worked for a systems integration firm, and I can tell you that our teams all specialized in one or two or five at the most different vendors. You as a developer and as an integrator, you just really can't learn more products than that at the depth you need to advise your clients. Services firms, we found, might specialize in something like open source, or vice versa. They might ignore open source. And what we found in many of the marketplaces that we cover is that kind of bifurcates the market for you, and only allows you to see half the market, and that's not good. Likewise, services firm might never recommend software as a service option, because there's either no work or very little work for them to do in those cases, and that's not good unless you're hedging your bets and looking at software as a service on your own. And then finally, you know, in many cases, SIs and vendors have a financial relationship behind the scenes, and whether it's just a dinner or a golf, this is always bad for you as a buyer, because you don't know the real reasons they're recommending a tool. One more argument to this is that switching costs. There's very different risks here when we look at switching out your consultant or integrator, or switching out your software vendor. Both are painful. I don't want to minimize either, but it's always tougher to leave your software vendor than your integration partner. Your content and data is structured for a particular software repository. Your templates, workflows, and customizations have been tied to that system, and you probably have API integrations between systems that are very much tied to those systems, and that's really hard to get off. So the analogy we'll make here is that if changing integrators is like switching plumbers, then changing vendors is like remodeling your bathroom completely. So we generally recommend get a blueprint, select the fixtures, then find the right plumber. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about the chicken and egg scenario, but really what you end up with at the end is, in many cases, is a blended team. You know, almost certainly you'll get some services from the vendor, you'll get some services from a tech integrator, and then possibly some other services from an agency or design firm that can give you some of those softer skills, and then your team will be integrated as well in a perfect world. And so the way we recommend to most of our clients as to an ideal approach is that we always say, select the right technology first. Select the technology that's the right fit for what you're trying to do, and then find the right integrator that is a good mesh with your team and fits well with your integrated team that can implement it. Now, the downside to this is that it takes more time and effort up front, but we have seen this approach be successful with many, many clients in many different industries around the world, and some of the most successful projects that we've seen have gone about this process the right way. However, I realize that we live in a very real world where taking this much time to do two sequential selections is not always possible. So in those cases where you need sort of a faster track, we recommend a combination type selection. So in this combination type approach, we ask a technology vendor to come to the table with a services partner and bid together. So what it ends up looking is that you have a systems integrator or a SI bidding with a independent software vendor, and you're able to then compare apples to apples across the board, and you test them both as to their fit from a technology perspective and their fit from a partner perspective. This can be a little bit tougher because you're dealing with multiple variables here, and some of the challenges that we've gotten into is we've seen our clients fall in love with the technology, but really not like a particular partner, and vice versa, and that's caused some additional cycles to a project. But in many cases, this is what it's going to be like in a real project. You're going to be working with both the technology and the partner, so a lot of lessons can be learned in going through this combination approach too. And this is becoming more and more common that we're seeing in all the technologies that we're working with our clients to bring on board. We've also applied this methodology to selecting pure digital agencies, agencies of record for some organizations. And if there's one kind of lesson learned that really applies to any type of partner selection is you want to get them away from their traditional pitches. I don't want them to just come in and give a pitch that they give to everyone else, or give you this really creative a new idea that they have. I want them to come in and speak to how they can help you with the things that are most relevant and to your needs. And so when we talk about our testable process, I'll get back to our RSVP, our real story vendor procurement process. It's really a winnowing down process, and you're testing at every phase. So you're testing via custom scenarios in any RFP or RFD in some cases where you're requesting people to come in and demo. You're testing them via the custom demo so that they're not able to. You're not just asking them to come in give that generic pitch. You're actually asking them to come in and say, here's how our services, our technology, our skill set will look like in a real project situation, and get them to really customize something for you. And then finally, in a true head-to-head proof of concept, or a bake-off, as it's sometimes known, where you're able to really mimic a real project. So I can't stress that enough. To really understand what it's like to work with these partners, you want to craft real scenarios, use real content where it's appropriate, get your real people involved, and set up real project environments so that you're able to really learn about what it's like to work with these people. Here's an example of a proof of concept structure that we give to proof of concept participants. And again, this will probably look familiar to many people because it looks like a real project. It mimics a real project in every way, and we want to set up an environment where your team is working with their team and the technology, and you're able to learn a lot of different things. Not least of which is the team dynamics. I can think of a situation recently where we had a vendor team in the room, as well as a partner in the room, and going through a proof of concept. And almost on a daily basis, the vendor and the partner would get in arguments on a regular basis, and this was picked up quite frequently by the client team, and we certainly it certainly raised a lot of red flags for them going throughout this process, and ultimately it was highlighted that the situation as it was being presented was not going to work in the long term. So team dynamics with each other, team dynamics with your team, as well as this is your chance to kind of give them some rope to hang themselves, if you will, in the sense that we want them to kind of lead a POC. We established a structure, but we want them to be able to highlight the way they work, their methodologies, their processes, their communication skills, and ultimately you'll understand how well they understand what you're looking for, and you'll understand how well that they know the technology that they're implementing, as well as how competent they are into really executing on a real project. So some key takeaways here. I know I'm a little short on time, but to wrap this up, 5 key takeaways. Whenever you start a technology project, please get clear about what you need from outside consultants. Be honest with yourselves here. Secondly, it's always tougher to leave your software vendor. Thirdly, in an ideal world, we always recommend picking the software vendor first and then having a second round of competition for a service partner or two, but we realize that that's not always practical. So for those of you on a faster track, we recommend a combination selection. And if there's one thing that you leave today with, it's you need to test your partners like you test the technology. Mimic real life projects as much as possible. So don't just let them come in and pitch you on what they can do. Let you set up the parameters, really make them jump through some hoops, and make sure that they're able to meet your unique needs. So I know I'm a little short on time, and I'll take a question or two here. The first question is one that we talk about quite a bit, and you're asking if we at Real Story Group evaluate partners like we do technology, and I can say no, we do not. Some firms try to do this, and I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to try to evaluate partner teams, because really what you're evaluating at the end of the day is people, and teams change from project to project, and even within organizations, the skill set among developers really dramatically differs, and so that's a dangerous thing to try to generalize. This is different from the way we evaluate technology, because we think technology is fundamentally suited for different use cases, and that's really the difference there. So we made a decision quite a long time ago to only evaluate technology and not implementation teams. Question. So we have a question here about, can you address using consultants that provide start to finish services? So this is everything from vendor selection to configuration to launch and ongoing support. Yeah, so Christy, that's a great question, and I think that's sort of the one time that we would recommend you pick a partner before the technology, right? Because you're actually looking for someone to guide you through the whole process. The one caveat I would give you there is that I think what we've seen is that there's very few, if any, organizations that really excel at every phase of the process. It's a much different skill set to help someone go through a selection process. There's a number of firms that specialize that, like us, not just us, I'll say, but the firms that are good at helping you select, I would never say they're probably not the same firms that you want to oversee necessarily your do a pure integration. And so maybe they'll help you pick an integrator, and that's a good model. But to have one firm oversee everything and actually do everything, that's a different story. So with that said, I think we're running well over our time, and I want to respect all of your time and thank you all for joining me today. I will look at the additional questions that came in and address some of them via some offline messages. But with that, I will say thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you again or seeing you on a future webinar. Thank you.